Cesar Chavez was totally nonviolent.
It was to be done in a nonviolent way.
That's fake news.
The Teamsters Union. So their role was essentially to be a bunch of whores to the growers.
I'm gonna be very frank with you. I have all kinds of guts, you know. I'm not scared of nobody, and I'm a son of a bitch in terms of fighting for the rights of Filipinos in this country.
The fight for equality must be fought on many fronts, in urban slums, the sweatshops of the factories and fields. A struggle for freedom, for dignity, and humanity. Martin Luther King Jr. In the midst of the 1960s and 70s, three groups, the Filipinos, the Mexicanos, and the growers, had reached a boiling point, which compelled them to work together. Violence raged throughout the San Joaquin Valley. Fights broke out. Police arrested protesters. Multiple cold storages were arsoned. As time went on, these conflicts started to impact our nation and other parts of the world. If it was not for the creation of the Agricultural Labor Relations Board, there would still be many disputes today.
The workers had interests in salaries, working conditions, health care, pensions, etc. Agricultural employees are specifically excluded from the National Labor Relations Act, passed by President Roosevelt.
The Filipinos were the first ones to start the movement. Larry Leung, a Filipino activist, was fighting for the better treatment of Filipinos in the field. And the first strikes began on the evening of September 7th, 1965.
On that night, September 7th, they were all in the hall, talking. My father was speaking, and Pete Velasco and Phil Veracruz, and I believe they all took turns speaking. And it was Mr. Armington. He's the one that initiated the vote to strike the following day. And that following day, they picked grapes until noon, set them down on the ground, and some walked off and some sat down.
On September 13th, Larry Leung approached Cesar Chavez, the leader of the National Farm Workers Association, to join the Filipinos in the grape strikes. Cesar found himself conflicted whether to join or not. Had it not been for his wife, Helen Chavez, the merger may have never taken place.
So they went out on strike. They asked us to join them. And so we had already had our own organization, mostly Mexicanos. Theirs were mostly Filipino. And they asked us to join them. He was talking to my mother about it, and she's like, "What do you mean you don't know? We're a union, aren't we? Well, then that's what unions do. We need to go out and strike. We need to join them."
As the Filipinos continued their strikes, the Mexicanos came to an agreement at Guadalupe Church in Delano and decided to join the Filipinos on September 16th, 1965. Thus begins the 5-year Delano grape strikes. During the strikes, United States Senator Robert F. Kennedy presided over the Senate subcommittee hearings on migratory labor on March 16th, 1966 at Delano High School.
Then it's my duty to stop them.
Well, then you go out and arrest them?
Well, absolutely.
Who told you that they're going to riot?
The men right out in the field that they were talking to said, if you don't get them out of here, we're going to cut their hearts out. So rather than let them get cut, you remove the cause.
How can you go arrest somebody if they haven't violated the law?
They're ready to violate the law. In other words, Attorney, what shall we do?
Could I suggest in the interim period of time, in the luncheon period of time, that the sheriff and the district attorney read the Constitution of the United States?
This brought national attention to California's agricultural influence in the United States. Many people around the nation then pledged support for the workers and their movement. Over time, and despite the workers' best efforts, the grape strikes had not succeeded.
The UFW wasn't really making any progress in the field because workers weren't walking off the job. The strike was demonstrations, really. It wasn't a strike, because a strike means workers stop working and they step off out of the job. Rather, it was more of a demonstration because there were outsiders coming in and picketing and making a lot of noise. And, of course, the media shows up and they claim that those are strikers. Well, they weren't strikers. They were demonstrators.
So the leaders of the NFWA and Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee agreed to come together to create the United Farm Workers in 1966. The UFW then decided to initiate a grape boycott. that began in the summer of 1967.
We were going to do the grape boycott, and so Cesar said, well, we can't boycott grapes because we've got this contract with DiGiorgio. We should boycott potatoes. This is one of the arguments that Cesar and I had. We used to have heated arguments. And I said, Cesar, I said, if you think of potatoes, people don't think of California, they think of Idaho.
Tension continued to rise as the boycotts continued.
I mean, there was violence. Our cold storage was arsoned. I was personally pelted with rocks. There were nail-type things set out on the roads that flattened tires.
The violence was never ending and was getting out of hand. The growers were suffering great financial losses from the boycotts.
And they just got tired of the instability, not because they wanted to, but it was business for them. And they figured that with all of the public outcry that was taking place, not only here in California, but throughout the United States, and then when it started affecting the industry in Europe, then, I mean, they said, you know, this has got to stop.
So they came together and developed a compromise on July 29, 1970.
They got a motel room, and then Cesar told him, well, you know, I'm glad you called for this meeting, but we're not going to negotiate with you until we get all the grape growers, all the guys from Delano and from Bakersfield, the Tobaccoviches and the Carringtons, all of them. And then he said, and you have to do it in 48 hours. And you know what they did?
Oh, everyone was ecstatic. This was like true victory.
It was a day of really kind of relief that the parties had found a peaceful way to bring this to a conclusion.
The labor hiring halls were a product of the 3-year agreement, and many people had various opinions on the way the hiring halls were handled.
This is the honest-to-gosh truth. On 2 separate occasions, I personally had to go down to the union hiring hall, go into the hiring hall, take it over, and dispatch people. Because it was so disorganized down there, the people didn't know what they were doing.
Even the Filipinos who started the strikes were at the lower end of the seniority list.
The Filipinos discovered that they had the bad end of a contract, being part of the United Farm Workers. When they went back to the union hiring hall the day after the strike was over to get their job assignments, and discovered that they couldn't get the jobs because they weren't senior enough in this new union.
After the 3-year agreement expired, the Teamster Union seized the opportunity to get a contract with the growers and represent the workers for a year.
This is a huge, huge union of truck drivers, most notably, that at that time jumped in bed with the growers in an unholy alliance, they called it, to attempt to defeat the efforts of the Farm Workers Union and deny them contracts that were going to guarantee good wages and benefits and working conditions.
When the contracts with the Teamsters ended, the workers had no representation. Richard Alatorre, an East LA legislator and author of the 1975 California Agricultural Labor Relations Act, convinced Governor Jerry Brown of California to sign the bill into law.
There was a give and take about things that they liked and things that they didn't like, things that the farm workers didn't like and did like, and it was a meeting of the minds.
It's the best labor law in the world for workers, the best in the world.
The ALRB improved the quality of life for generations of farm laborers by granting them the right to unionize, the right to fair wages and pensions, and even the rights to water, shade, and breaks in the field. For over 42 years, growers know that if they mistreat their workers, those workers can file a complaint with the ALRB. Though political parties may change, the board will be kept well in place into the 21st century. Without this compromise, the stability of the agricultural economy of the United States would be thrown into disarray. The compromise gave a voice of representation, not only for those who worked in the grape industry, but for all agricultural workers across the nation.